Korea was once a single nation that was annexed by Japan in 1910, but when Japan was defeated during World War II, Soviet Union forces took control of the north, while American forces took over the south. And that was the beginning of the long-lasting rivalry between South Korea and North Korea. Now, we are not going to discuss every detail of the history of South Korea and North Korea, but instead, we will talk about why, after so many years, North Korea got left behind and remained poor while South Korea became an insanely rich country. What really happened to North Korea that resulted in the huge gap of wealth between them and South Korea? For us to understand this topic better, let us first learn about the economic differences between these two nations. South Korea and North Korea are like yin and yang. After their separation, they also dramatically separated almost every aspect of their way of life. They are like twins, but with different behaviors. I would like to call South Korea the extrovert Korea, while North Korea is the introvert Korea. Well, I think we are aware that North Korea is one of the most isolated countries in the world, and when it comes to the economy, it is a bad thing because every country needs other countries to grow their economies. On the other hand, South Korea is one of the most active nations when it comes to participating in global trade. Anyway, I think you already have an understanding of why South Korea is rich while North Korea is poor, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Let's try to dive deeper into the main reasons. To measure how rich or poor one country is, we need to get their GDP, or gross domestic product, and of course, their GDP per capita as well. If we are going to rank all countries by their GDP, then South Korea can be found in the 13th spot for having $1.674 trillion in GDP and around $34.65 thousand in GDP per capita. That is really impressive wealth for a country that was once a victim of colonialism. And as of today, South Korea's economy is considered one of the largest in the world. And like China, their own made products are well known in the world, such as Samsung Electronics, which is ranked 14th as the largest company in the world according to Forbes, and other companies like Hyundai Motor, Kia, and many more. And that was the result of South Korea's decision not to isolate their country from the world. But what about North Korea? What is their GDP? Are they really poor? Well, before answering that, let me ask you one question. Do you know one product that is made in North Korea? If the answer is no, then you already have an idea why North Korea is still poor. And that is because of their isolation. They are never as active in global trade as South Korea. Since North Korea is not transparent about their economic data to the world, it is actually hard to get information and data about their economy. And even if they voluntarily gave their data, we are not sure if it was correct or just a lie. So getting their GDP and GDP per capita is quite challenging. Then how has North Korea been identified as a poorer country than South Korea? Well, through economic studies and estimation. You see, since North Korea never gave their data on GDP, the task has fallen to outside researchers and institutions such as the Bank of Korea and other economic experts from other nations like the United States and the United Nations, with the help, of course, of South Korea. The GDP of North Korea was estimated to be $16.3 billion in 2021, according to the latest data from the United Nations. And as you noticed, it was way lower than the GDP of South Korea, which is $1.674 trillion. But of course, it leads to some controversy because some people suggest that the estimate was incorrect and that North Korea is not actually that poor. But actually, they are poor, not only in comparison with South Korea, but also in terms of the World Economic Standard. With the help of new technology, experts are allowing themselves to rate the poverty in North Korea by using satellite imagery. And according to them, the poverty rate in North Korea is around 60%. But of course, if that estimate was not enough to prove that North Korea is actually suffering from poverty, then let's analyze their economy based on some available data we have. I mentioned that North Korea is not as active in global trade as South Korea is with other nations, so where do they get their money and resources? Well, even though they are isolated countries, they still make some trade with some selected nations, particularly China. China has been the largest trading partner of North Korea ever since the Kim dynasty was founded. It means they heavily rely on China. But before the Soviet Union got dissolved, this nation frequently receives financial support from the Soviet Union. And since then, North Korea has adapted to the idea of being a self-reliant country. Therefore, they try to survive without the help of other nations, of course, except for their friend China. But then again, like I said, the real problem of this country is that they can't grow without making trade with many other nations in the world. The second main reason why they are poor is the priority of their leader. You see, North Korea's main goal is to build a powerful army. Thus, they spent a huge portion of their GDP on building military weapons like nuclear power. And their military expenses are no joke, as they once ranked #1 when it came to spending money from GDP on the military. Because in 2022, North Korea was recorded to have spent almost 33% of its GDP in the military. That is way too much if you think about it. Though the advantage of having strong military forces is obvious, it does not help feed their citizens. And having immense military power does not equate to a strong economy. Quite in contrast to South Korea, this country never prioritizes the military. Instead, they prioritize the growth of their economy. To help visualize this matter, just think that North Korea just spent 33% of their GDP on their military in 2022. On the other hand, South Korea only spent 2.72% of their GDP on their military in the same year. Of course, you might say that South Korea is richer, so just 2.72% of GDP is way too big a budget for the military, right? Well, not really. Because if we're going to compare the military power of South Korea versus North Korea, then South Korea does not stand a chance. In fact, North Korea has more than twice as many military forces as the Republic of Korea to the south. That fact only shows that the priorities of these two Korean nations are different. Would you believe that when Korea was divided, North Korea had more potential to become rich than South Korea? Well, it was because during that time, all the heavy industries and natural resources were in the north. So obviously, the north has the advantage because South Korea doesn't have heavy industries that could help them recover from the economic crisis. But now, as you can see, South Korea has become the 10th largest economy in the world in just one generation. That was too quick if you think about it. Many economists called it South Korea's economic miracle. However, that was not actually a miracle. That was a result of the pure hard work and dedication of this country to progress. But of course, hard work without a smart system is useless. And I think that is the secret behind the success of South Korea. Its system. You see, in 1960, the South was really poor, and they are actually poorer than some countries in Africa. Anyway, I'd like to introduce to you this man, Park Chung-hee, the man who played a key role in South Korea's success. This man was once a general who raised a coup d'etat and took control of the government of the South. Well, it was a long story, but to make it short, Park decided to minimize the help they are getting from foreign aid, meaning they should stop relying too much on the financial support from other nations and become rich like those countries that are helping them. It was a great challenge, but Park Chung-hee had a plan that needed a step-by-step process. The first step is that the nation needs to have skilled and knowledgeable citizens, because the next generation will be the ones to run the country. So the government under Park started to prioritize education over anything else. Education is so important in this nation that they have a mandatory primary and secondary education policy. Even today, they still prioritize education because they still believe that the key to economic growth is the citizen, so they need to invest in their own people. And I'm telling you, that was a very effective strategy. In fact, as of today, South Korea is ranked 4th among the top performing countries when it comes to education. Anyway, the second step was to create an income. A nation needs funds. To get funds, you need business, so they start making business by making products that they can trade worldwide. But again, they don't have heavy industry to use, and they don't even have big capital to invest in some huge venture of business. So they started with light industries like textiles, which require smaller investments and infrastructure. During the Park Chung-hee administration, They made this so-called 5-year plan. The idea was that they needed to achieve at least a 7% growth rate from 1962 to 1966, but they exceeded the expectation with a 9% growth rate. Anyway, I want you to remember that during that time, they just started to invest in education, so the people are not yet ready to take on more advanced and modern businesses. So they only focused on some businesses like agriculture and light industries. The goal was to expand the electricity and energy industries, emphasizing the importance of infrastructure for establishing a solid foundation for the next generation, which is still studying. And while doing that, they also started to make a transition to a more advanced technology business venture. And by 1972, the Park government started to focus on heavy industries like steel, shipbuilding, and car manufacturing to increase economic growth. And that was the beginning of South Korea's rapid growth, since they started to trade with different big nations like Japan. And because this nation started to have more knowledgeable and skilled citizens because of education, they were able to build names in the technology world. I am not going to give full details about this matter, but in South Korea, the government is the one who will decide what to produce and who will make it. And they decided to build Samsung, LG, and Hyundai, or what they called chaebols. Anyway, the point here is that South Korea made a step-by-step plan, starting with education, building a foundation, transitioning from light industry to heavy industry, and then becoming a top player in technology. South Korea made it all by following their plan and system. But of course, their success was made possible because they did not isolate their country. Their heavy participation in global trade is the key to their success, which is what North Korea is lacking. Despite having the advantage to begin with, North Korea failed to nurture it. They remain isolated for a long time because they were left behind and cannot catch up with the new technologies and systems. Of course, a huge part of it is their type of government. The Kim dynasty believes that they can actually survive without the needs of others, but sadly, survival is not the only thing a nation needs. It also needs to grow and adapt to new things. And in order for North Korea to grow like the South, they need to open their borders to the world. But is that possible? Do you think North Korea will decide one day that they will welcome other nations, or perhaps join again with South Korea? What if one day South Korea and North Korea can become one country once again? Well, that is for another topic here in Grand Line Media.